What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to dive into a bunch of small topics regarding the New York Giants, mainly around the practice strategy from Joe Judge. And of course, Joe Judge has been heavily scrutinized by members of the New York media over the last, couple of weeks in the way he's handled the practices, specifically the articles that came out about him making the players and the coaches run laps, which I believe Joe Judge later disputed the fact that he's made coaches run laps. But regardless, people were saying maybe he's being too hard on the players, which I am in complete agreement with, that I think he should start to develop a culture and be more of a disciplinarian. It's something that the New York Giants have needed for quite some time, but that's beside the point. I wanted to talk about some of the things that came out recently about some of the things he's been doing in practice to try to simulate the game and get the players ready. And matter of fact, there's 3 topics I'm going to talk about. Also, I wanted to talk about the center battles. Joe Judge came out and had some comments about that between Spencer Pulley and Nick Gates. We'll start there. Nick Gates, to me, I think is the favorite. Now, he came out and said that it is scratch even, meaning that it's 50-50 as to who will get that job. He said very encouraging things about both players. He talked about Nick Gates' versatility. He talked about Spencer Pulley's experience. And we'll have to wait and see. But Spencer Pulley was on the sideline yesterday while Nick Gates continues to get first-team reps. Now, Pulley, I thought a couple of weeks ago was definitely going to get that job due to his experience and due to the fact that Nick Gates has never played center. Shane Lemieux's never played center. But it looks like it's a 2-horse race. I think you could take Shane Lemieux out of it. It seems like it's down to Pulley, and it's down, of course, to Nick Gates. But I think Nick Gates right now, if you ask me, is the favorite. The fact that the New York Giants gave him that contract extension showed confidence in the New York Giants and his ability to be a starting offensive lineman for this football team. Judge did talk about his versatility, and he loves the effort he's been putting forward. So that continues to be a minor storyline. But I really think that Nick Gates will be the starting center by year's end. The 3 things I wanted to talk about with Joe Judge that I thought were very interesting, and you can find these on Giants Wire, you can find it on any Giants website, was some of his practice techniques and how he's trying to get the New York Giants ready to play and ready for the season. And it seems as if Joe Judge wants these guys as prepared as humanly possible, which any head coach should want. In addition to that, he doesn't want them to be making silly mistakes. I expect the New York Giants to be one of the least penalized teams in football. And what I did was I looked back in Football Database and looked at last year. And actually, I was surprised that the New York Giants were the 3rd least penalized team in football. They only committed 90 penalties last year, but when you break down the penalties, that's where it gets interesting, and it's where I find his practice techniques to be interesting. The first thing I'm going to talk about is how he's kind of told guys, do not fight in training camp. And there was a fight that broke out yesterday between Evan Ingram and Lorenzo Carter. There's highlights of it, and yeah, it seemed like a bit of a scrum. Joe Judge later went on to compliment the players in the way that they handled it in the aftermath. But Joe Judge has come out and said, if you fight in practice, we're going to treat you the same as if you fight in the game. If you fight in the game, you're going to get kicked out. If you fight in practice, you're going to get kicked out. And of course, training camp is known for that, right? You're known to have scrums and guys when it gets physical in the heat to kind of go at each other. And, every training camp you hear about 2 or 3 or 4 fights. Joe Judge has tried to make it so players are not fighting in training camp because he's trying to get them prepared for the game. He wants them to be mentally prepared, stay focused, and not make silly mistakes. And it's kind of what I expect from Joe Judge, a meticulous guy, the special teams coordinator, a guy who really thinks everything out. From everything we've seen from the start. And I think it'll translate to the ways that he handles timeouts, late game decision-making, things like that, the way he handles his coaching staff. So I actually think that's a really good thing, although I do like sometimes when the guys get into a scuffle and you got to get physical in training camp, which is kind of going to bring me to my second point, and then we'll get to the third, talking about Daniel Jones, and it's been a big storyline. Daniel Jones, the quarterback, of course, wears the red jersey just like every other quarterback when you're in training camp. The reason for that, it's supposed to tell the defensive players, don't hit your quarterback. He's our golden goose. He's the guy that's going to get us to the promised land if we're going to have a good year this year. And if Daniel Jones goes down, I think we all know that Colt McCoy is not going to win us many football games. And we need Daniel Jones to progress this year. Of course, he had an injury last year where he missed 2 games with the hurt ankle. Well, Joe Judge came out and talked about he's been mulling over the removing of the red jersey for Daniel Jones. And, of course, that's going to immediately spark controversy from the writers, from fans of the New York Giants. And I'm going to kind of try to dive into Joe Judge's mindset and why I think it could make a lot of sense to take off that red jersey specifically this year. Now, most years I wouldn't be in favor of taking off the red jersey. I think it would be a dumb mistake. But most years you have preseason games to get acclimated to getting hit. contact. And for a quarterback, specifically Daniel Jones, he's got to get used to that. Who fumbled 18 times last year? Daniel Jones. A lot of the reason for that was because he couldn't anticipate pressure and he couldn't, get used to getting hit. And that's why he fumbled the ball 18 times, or at least a large reason for it. And he has to improve his pocket awareness. And there's only so much you can simulate without the quarterback actually being feared of getting hit to improve on that aspect of his game. And it's the aspect that we need Daniel Jones to improve on more so than any other. And the fact that there's no preseason games, which is normally where a quarterback would get hit and endure that, I think it actually makes sense. Now, of course, the defensive players on the New York Giants have to have enough common sense to realize, okay, we could now touch this guy and put pressure on Daniel Jones and we could hit him, but we're not trying to hurt the guy. We're not trying to go over the top. And, of course, if Daniel Jones would ever get hurt, Joe Judge would be crucified. I mean, by every member of the New York media. So it would be a very risky move on his part. But I think it does make sense with everything else he's trying to do, trying to get them used to the regular season game. And if Daniel Jones isn't used to getting hit, you could actually make an argument that he stands more of a chance of getting hurt once we start playing games. Due to the fact that there's no preseason games this year, you can't simulate getting hit by a 300-pound defensive lineman. So I actually think it makes sense. It's risky on Judge's part, because if Dexter Lawrence rolls over Daniel Jones, well, but like I said, I would think that defensive players would be talked to, and maybe it's just the fear and thought process from Daniel Jones that he could be hit, the red jersey's off, that I think could improve his game and that aspect in practice, which is what Joe Judge is trying to do. The other thing that I wanted to touch on that I thought was really interesting was the tennis balls. So what Joe Judge has done is he's put tennis balls on each of the DB's hands. The reason for that, he's trying to limit holding penalties. And again, he's trying to pick up the hidden yardage. If this team is going to win games this year, they're going to win it in the hidden yardage department, which is, not that many penalties, and winning in special teams, punt coverage, things of that nature. I actually think it's a really good idea because it makes it so the defensive players cannot hold. They have to get used to covering the wide receivers the proper way and the proper technique. And when I dove into last year's penalties, as I said at the top of the video, the New York Giants committed 90 total penalties, which was the 30th most in the league, the third fewest, which is great. They didn't beat themselves, but two areas where they did. 25 of those 90 penalties came from defensive pass interference and defensive holding. They ranked in the bottom 5 in defensive pass interference with, I think, 14 or 15 total penalties, and they ranked in the bottom 7 or 8 in defensive holding. It was everywhere else where they performed very well. They had very few offensive holding penalties, unnecessary roughness penalties, but the cornerbacks, which makes sense because they were very young, learning a complex system under Betcher with the zone defense, guys like DeAndre Baker, was near the bottom of the league in both categories. And I'm sure Joe Judge saw that, and he's trying to improve in that aspect. So all in all, as it all sums up to, whether it's the fighting and trying to lessen penalties there, the tennis balls on people's hands, and trying to get your quarterback, used to getting hit. I think it all makes sense. I think it all translates to Joe Judge is trying to get this team prepared as best he can within, not a normal offseason for this Pittsburgh Steelers Week 1. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out, but I like some of the things that Joe Judge is doing. A little risky on the red jersey part. We'll have to see if that actually happens. But the fact that we don't have games, I think it makes a lot of sense. As far as the tennis balls goes, I mean, maybe that's old school. Maybe that's something he picked up along the way in high school and college. I like it, specifically when you look into the penalties that this secondary committed last year. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.